how about we start off with how Remco Evenepoel went from the start of this Vuelta and ended up in the red jersey towards the end? Because, first of all, the team time trial, for example, it's a flat team time trial. Remco Evenepoel's team, Quickstep, losing 14 seconds on Jumbo-Visma in that time trial. Now, in hindsight, having seen the entire Grand Tour, that's nothing. But the day itself, that's a notable difference that Quickstep is losing towards Jumbo-Visma, that Evenepoel is losing towards Roglic, for example. Stage 4 is really the day where other changes could occur, and that's where Roglic once again took an extra gap on Evenepoel by winning that stage, and not only that, 13 seconds, because he also took that 3 bonus second sprint in front of Alaphilippe before in the stage. So that's extra seconds that Roglic was taking on Evenepoel. At this point in the race, do you think that it's normal based on the parkour of the first full stage that Evenepoel had taken a deficit towards Roglic?
I mean, 30 seconds is not inconsequential. And I do think this stage 4 was the worst stage from Quickstep of the race in terms of they went for Alaphilippe is the answer. They went for Alaphilippe. He did not have the shape at this point in the race. And I continue to be of the view that when you're going for red and when you're going against Roglic, who you don't know his condition, so you have to assume the worst from a Quickstep perspective, which is that he's really, really good. I think I said at the time I didn't like the way they played it. Because he lost time and lost the bonus sprint, I didn't think, Evenepoel's in bad shape, he can't win because he came 8th or 10th or whatever, because unlike the other GC riders, remember Movistar, they had Rojas, Oliveira dropping Mas off at the base. So of course, I mean, did well, Mas, but that all makes a difference. So no, I wasn't too concerned because I thought the TT would net off about 30 seconds and then the rest of the race would be equal, like they'd be level, and I thought maybe Evenepoel had the edge, but the next stage was that Soler stage. Nothing really happened. I did say maybe Quickstep would try something. Stage 6 was the huge one, Piccolhano. We'd written this down, 12k 6.5%. I thought it is hard to make differences on a climb like this. I really didn't expect such big differences, and I was wrong. The temperature went down to 15 degrees. Evenepoel put in a minute 20 into Roglic, Sivakov, Gegenhardt, Hindley, all the GC contenders except Mas on his wheel and Ayuso about 40 seconds back. This was like crazy performance, but I think it is worth remembering. You can't just be like, oh, great for Evenepoel. You have to think what played into his favour. Easy stage the day before. The temperature went down. The stage before was not that difficult. And maybe Roglic wasn't in top shape either. But
the 8th stage, we saw him get to the line together with Mas and Roglic. So there he could not make the difference necessarily. But on the line, he was the first of the 3, once again claiming territory, basically saying, yeah, guys, you can't even beat me in the sprint to the line here. And sure, it's not for bonus seconds, but he also didn't have to go all out sprinting against Roglic there because Roglic kind of couldn't have that extra sprint towards the end of this stage. But I think the other big one next to Piccolhano is Les Prades. And it's one of those things where I swear back in the day, Basque Country we still had doubts when it comes to Remco and steeper climbs where he seemed to drop off the back of those groups he was in Basque Country on the steeper climbs and then gradually take his own tempo and crawl back to the front. But we knew at that time that his weight was higher than it was supposed to be at the Vuelta because I think him or his coach had said that in the media. So I was expecting some better stuff in there, but the differences he made on the stage of Les Prades is significant. He finishes on 134 of the winner, which is Mankey's on that stage, and Mas finishes on 218. Ayuso sprinted past everyone with a 50 kilometer per hour sprint at the top of Les Prades. Like, that's also a big one, right? And that clashes the myth of steepness. But you already felt like that was okay after El Lights in San Sebastian, right?
yeah, I thought, he's not going to do this performance on Piccolhano 6.5 for 30 and then not be able to do 6.7 or whatever he did. He did more than that, but let's say I thought the baseline GC guy would do 6.7 on Perez for 15 minutes. Well, he's not going to like his curve will somehow not be worse at 15 minutes than he could do at 30 minutes just because it was 13%, where it actually sometimes is easier to do higher watts on steep gradients. So I think this was extremely important, mainly because Mas was close. Mas was on 28
Yeah.
seconds before Perez. And I know Remco was always going to smoke him in the TT, but Mas, I think, in another world which didn't exist, say there was the Pandera stage or I don't know, the Piccohano stage or something in the third week in hot conditions, then 28 seconds to Mas is not comfortable. And the reason this going into, so let's go to the TT then, because that's after the rest day. Evenepoel's got 241, 303 on Mas. Why is this important? Well, first of all, for Roglic, not so much. Roglic was going to try and win. He doesn't matter about the parcours, didn't matter about UCI points, didn't care about the podium. So 241 versus 1 minute, it's just a better buffer to have. But it wouldn't mean that Roglic would mark Rodriguez and just ruin his chances at going for first. For Mas, with the points, they openly said Movistar that it's extremely important.
Yeah.
And we saw Quickstep were weak after Alaphilippe crashed out because Alaphilippe was good on Perez. Quickstep were weak relative to what you might want in the third week on that sort of parcours, and it didn't matter because Rodriguez, Ayuso, Almeida, Lopez, Mas, because of this buffer Evenepoel's on, O'Connor, they all just fired each other and paced each other back. And Remco pretty much didn't have to do anything except mark Mas on that 5% climb. And even if he drops there, like he loses 20 seconds, it matters, doesn't matter at all. But yeah, I think that buffer was hugely important. And what do you think about people always say, oh, he's doing too much? He's doing too much. Not to Remco, I mean people who are very, very aggressive at the start of Grand Tours. And like, he'll pay for that at the end. I think that's flawed logic. Like, did Bernal do worse on Sega de Ala because he took lots of time on a 5-minute punchy effort to Campo Felice where he dropped Yates in week one? Like, I'd like to see the data on that.
I think it depends. I think there's some realism in the factor that if people spend more energy in the third week than in the first week, that they might have less energy in the last week in general. Like, I think there is some truth in that, but I also think that it doesn't need to be a bad thing all the time. Because, for example, when Pogacar was sprinting for no extra seconds, for no bonus seconds and so forth in the first week of the tour, I found that a bit too much sometimes. When it comes to Remco in this first week, he didn't do that necessarily. Try and massively sprint for a position and try and make sure he gains another 5 seconds in every sprint at the end of a stage. He didn't necessarily do that. He rode to the line. I think he did it once, perhaps, in week one somewhere. But when we look at this parcours of the Vuelta, it's also different towards other Grand Tours where the third week is not necessarily the most decisive week. So making that buffer initially is super important. And especially for a rider like Remco, who might not be as confident about his third week than his first week, so wants to have that buffer beforehand. So I think for a rider like Remco in this Vuelta, it can add to the confidence of the rider, and it can add to the factor that the opposing competition, like you mentioned, like a Mas, gets into the situation where they start thinking about the podium more than the victory before the third week, and as a consequence, attack less in week two, and they might regret that in week three when they can't catch up with Remco anymore. That kind of stuff. I think it depends on the situation, case by case. But in this situation, I feel like it's very good that Remco took that time in the first week, spent a lot of energy in the first week to get that. But I also feel like he didn't go crazy. Like, I disagree with people that say he went crazy in week one and made sure that everybody knew that he was going for every single second. I think he was going strong. I think he was spending energy, but nothing insane either. And I think that brings us to somewhere in week two, Peñas Blancas now. Nothing really happened too increasingly there. Mas, Evenepoel, and Roglic finished together. And I think it's really the crash that occurred afterwards, right? I don't know if it was on the Montilla stage, a stage that Pedersen ended up winning ahead of Kokara and so forth. I think it was there where Remco Evenepoel had his crash, and that was a moment where we were like, okay, I don't know. It might have been actually on the stage before already, on Peñas Blancas itself, that stage before the final climb.
Yeah, it was.
But it became a factor for Pondera and Sierra Nevada, perhaps. His side was packed in. I don't know if the time he lost on Pondera and so forth is because of the crash. I have no clue. I don't have the data that Quickstep has on that and so forth. It's possible that he was just having a few bad days as well, but I'm guessing that the crash probably had an influence. But it's also not terrible, right? Losing a minute on your worst moment in a Grand Tour, because Roglic Formigal, for example, in that Vuelta, he still won the Vuelta, lost time on that day. I think every single Grand Tour winner has had one day probably in their Grand Tour where they lost time. Bernal and Segariala lost time, for example. Like, it's okay to have one bad day.
I think the crash was 100% the culprit.
Okay.
Roglic didn't even do like his peak level. It's not like Roglic just came in, recovered after the first rest day, and was smashing everybody. It like Aronsman dropped Evenepoel, and no offense to
Yeah.
Timon Aronsman, but that's even if you think Evenepoel's dropped off 2%, well, then he's still going to be with Almeida and co. And Ayuso got unlucky on that stage too with the mechanical. So I think that was 100% the crash, but who cares? Like that's his own damn fault. He crashed. It was a mistake, and crashes are the worst thing you can just about do for recovery or for winning a Grand Tour. Avoiding crashes like Pogacar does is extremely important. But before we get to the back end of the race, all the action was kind of front loaded. It's September, and that means indoor season is here. Zwift have just announced a raft of updates with landing soon, so there's never been a better time to join or fire up the account. Again, if you pause your subscription over summer, there's more pace partners than ever, the ability to chase your PB ghost across segments, a new race series, and even new roads, all landing soon. Plus, with Zwift Academy starting soon, there's never been a better time to give indoor training a shot. For more information, head to Zwift.com down below. But yeah, Sierra Nevada, I think Evenepoel was fine, much better than Pandera. He was stronger than Roglic, Mas, and Lopez. I'm not sure if he was as strong as them. Maybe Mas was a little bit stronger than him because he was just playing the numbers game. He had like 3 minutes on Mars. He knew if he paces, he's also doesn't have any race. He has no experience of racing at that, going to that altitude. So he played it extremely conservative. He's just wrote his numbers and was like, if I sit on this pace, Mars will gain minimal time. If I sit on this, Roglic can't do anything. He could have probably dropped Roglic on Hazalanas if he wanted to, I think, but he didn't. So that's the sometimes weakness, or you look at the results, you're like, oh, he lost time. It's like that's not actually what happened. And when we get to the third week, there's not really too much to say other than he defended numerous attacks from Mas. If you have a 1 second advantage and all the climbs are 5%, then you have like, I don't know exactly pulling the number, say they're doing 30 kilometers an hour, you have like a 5-7% advantage. The other guy also has to get his team to pace. The other guy also has to then attack and spike, and you can be on the wheel, particularly when Mas, he's not like Pogacar or Roglic. Mas doesn't get separation from the group. He has to do
Yep.
a long attack. And yeah, that's basically the story of the third week, just defending. And there are actually no wobbles at all, and
Yep.
that's because of Roglic crashing out. Maybe if Roglic was there and Mars 1-2 ran for the pole, could have been problems. I don't know. I don't think so either. So pretty comfortable, Benji. I disagree with the notion that it was a weak field, particularly for a Vuelta. It had the 3-time back-to-back winner. It had, I think, 8 of the 10 of the Giro, including the winner, Jai Hindley. It didn't have Jonas and Pog, but rarely will the Vuelta have the 1 and 2 of the Tour in peak shape. So I think the start list was fine. And is there anything they would be thinking they need to do differently for next year, whatever Grand Tour he does?
Remco Evenepoel. Okay, what should he do differently? Like, it's not only Remco, it's also the team aspect. And for me, it's the decision on whether he's going to be sent to a Grand Tour with half a sprint train next to him with Jakobsen or Merlier. That might be more of the issue than Remco himself. I think Remco did pretty great. I think there were moments where he probably shouldn't have gone to the front of the group to start pacing, but it's not the end of the world because he's like 2 minutes and a half ahead. So even if he gets countered, then it's fine. So I don't know. He played the third week really intelligently, defensive, as he probably should in the third week. Try not to get counted and so forth. I think in week 1 and 2, you need to try and use every opportunity you have to get the gaps. Like we spoke about Jumbo's 2020 Tour de France quite a few times on this channel before, where the first 2 weeks they played rather defensively on chances where they could have had more time with Roglic. And that was one of the things that backfired in week 3, for example, when Roglic had his Planche de Belfi, well, Pogacar had his Planche de Belfi moment, or they both had their Planche de Belfi moment, just the opposites of the extreme. Anyway, I think that's one aspect to it, but I think they did pretty strongly. I think it's almost flawless this Vuelta for Evenepoel.
Yeah, I think he could do with Jan Hirt. I think Jan Hirt setting him up, doing a properly hard pull. Van Wilder was fine, um, but not great in the third week. He was not like Sepp Kuss is a guy when the GC guys are attacking. When there's 8 GC guys left on that Climb Morquera, for example, Kuss will be there, able to set pace just to keep it moving. And Van Wilder wasn't at that level, which is fine, but it is good to have someone like that. They will be hoping Jan Hirt can do that. I thought, well, Poles would have been a nice one, but they need someone to do that. Of course, Alaphilippe crashed out. I still think he can be a great domestique for Remco, but that's a difficult conversation to have, to be a domestique for an entirety of the Grand Tour if you're
Yeah.
Alaphilippe. But yeah, that's Evenepoel.